city where we could actually fill up at the city yard with that, we would explore that also. So we're looking for cheaper, more efficient fuel all the time, especially with our vehicles that we purchase or our lawnmowers that we purchase. And like I say, going to the recycled motor oil is just one of those things that usually doesn't float to the surface of being mentioned at a board meeting.
Thank you for all these initiatives. Thank you.
I think board members have raised a number of actions to be taken in the future, but I think approving these frameworks tonight is a great start. And students, children tend to be early adopters with these kinds of practices, quick adopters, and they bring it home. So the impact is even greater. We do have a public speaker.
Mr. Wheeler.
Good evening, and I did dress for the board meeting. While I heartily applaud this, I'm Lane Wheeler from the Santa Barbara Teacher Association. While I heartily applaud the idea of a green recycling program for our schools, I do think it needs to include elementary. But I also noticed several places in here where I would like to caution you to be aware, because sometimes things come in good packages but also have consequences that we didn't foresee. Developing a protocol for staff to remove recycled items into the recycling and trash into the trash. Once again, I wouldn't want to see those responsibilities added to the teacher's day, because I think it's already compacted and impacted. Throwing out field trips, while it's a really great idea, once again, I would wonder where that would fit into our curriculum as we have curricular days that are loaded with activities. And I think, the buy-in idea is a good one, and that they might fit in, and that would certainly be a worthwhile thing. But I'd like to see that thought out in advance. I did want to call to the board's attention that right now our schools seem to be becoming more and more used in a year-round fashion, but for a number of years in the past, we have had schools that have functioned for 10 months a year, and the trash gets picked up once a week, and we're paying for daily pickups. So I would like us to investigate, how to best use that. And I do notice there's language in here to suggest that we would refine our approach to when trash is picked up. I do think when you look at the total trash budget, it's a substantial amount of money that we pay to Marburg or BFI, and that should be used in the best way we can use it. I would also remind you that Mike Schallenberger, who is a industrial arts teacher at La Cumbra, has designed a cooking oil car, and he might be a good source for us to find a fueling source within our own resources. So I applaud this effort, and I would encourage you to take those into consideration and not add more responsibilities to teachers, but to empower them to be participants in this and to use this in the most productive way for all of our children, and present and future. Thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Wheeler. And
It smells like French fries driving down the street.
I just also quickly want to note, thank you to Lynn Rodriguez and Helene Schneider for making this a priority, in addition to all of the other folks who are involved. Great points, Mr. Wheeler. Maybe you might be interested in attending one of their meetings to share SBTA's perspective.
I thought you were calling for a motion. I was.
No, go ahead. You
accommodating
can. I will call for a motion.
Okay, I move to adopt the recycling framework for schools.
Second. So motion by Noel, second by Malakoff. All those in favor of approving these frameworks signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? So it is approved 5-0. Item E3, California School Boards Association Delegate Assembly nominations.
Good. You have the opportunity to nominate candidates to election to the CSBA Delegate Assembly if you so choose to nominate a candidate. Excuse me.
Anyone who becomes a candidate, we would be seeing their nomination forms sometime after January when nominations close. Anyone who's a nominee from our district, which is 11A.
You've done it in the past.
I've done it in the past and
You
found
want
it.
to continue?
No, because it's a 2-year term, and I will not be on a school board for 2 years. So it was extremely satisfying, I will say that. I don't know if anyone is interested. It could very well be contested, but the nominations are open. And the current representative from our area is Karen Anderson from Montecito Union. And she has indicated that she will finish her 2-year term and not continue.
I would like to nominate Kate Parker.
Thank you. How much time is involved with this?
It involves 2 meetings a year, a May meeting in Sacramento, and a meeting in November wherever the CSBA conference is. It precedes the CSBA conference.
Well, I'd be willing to do it.
I second the nomination.
You sure you
So,
don't want to do this, Dr. Noel?
Nomination by Cordero, second by Noel.
Well, of course, I could volunteer, but it was just sort of on.
Do you want to think about it, and we can bring it back very quickly to our meeting on the 11th?
I guess I don't need to think about it. I mean, if I ended up doing it, that would be absolutely fine with me. It sounds interesting. I'm also absolutely happy if somebody else from a different district gets nominated and elected, so,
Well, you would
That's
need to
fine.
fill out the nomination form.
that
and
looks,
Send it in by the appropriate deadline. It's not onerous.
okay.
May I call the question on this issue?
Certainly. All those in favor of Ms. Parker submitting a nomination form to potentially become a delegate to the CSBA Delegate Assembly signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. So 5-0. And it will be circulated to all of, your nomination form will be circulated to all of our all the school boards in Region 11A, and we'll see all of the nomination forms at one point in time, sometime after January. Okay. Item E4, approval of adoption of intent to convey easement to Southern California Edison at Monroe Elementary School.
We have a resolution for your consideration to convey the easement at Monroe School, and Dave Hetjunk will explain.
Thank you, Dr. Sarvis, members of the board. The city of Santa Barbara has established a underground utility district that includes an area surrounded by Monroe Elementary School. And as part of undergrounding the utilities, which would include not only the electrical lines, but other service lines that are carried on those poles, an easement is required to get the services to Monroe Elementary from where the poles are now. If you took the time to read the fine print and everything, you'll know that their original design proposal wanted the easement to be right through our new handicapped accessible walkway. We met with representatives on site. They redesigned the project to go around that so they would not disturb and we would not have an easement in our ADA court-approved walkway. So they've accommodated us. It's a minor amount of square footage. The education code dictates that we can, in fact, grant easements to utilities. We've been through this a few times before. You adopt a resolution of intent. Once you adopt that resolution, it is posted, it is advertised. That resolution indicates that we will have a public hearing on December 11th, at which time any members of the public that wish to speak to the matter may do so, and at which time then we would ask the board to actually approve the conveyance of the easement. This should be the second time you've seen the information. It was in the last board brief. So we have the board brief information, we have the notice of intent to grant the easement based on the resolution we're asking you to approve tonight, and then on December 11th, we would hold the hearing and hopefully grant the easement.
Thank you. Any questions from board members? Yeah, Ms. Parker?
No, but
Oh,
I'd like
I-
to move to approve the adoption of intent to convey easement to Southern California Edison and Monroe Elementary School Resolution 0708-13.
Second.
Thank you. So Parker and Cordero, all those in favor of approving the adoption of intent to convey the easement, Resolution 0708-13, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, it passes 5-0. You're welcome. Now we are on to item E5, board action on student expulsion case numbers, and if we could go in order of our summary sheet, 0708-09.
I would like to move in the case of 0708-09 that we move to suspend the expulsion and move the student to Las Alturas and follow the existing administrative hearing panel rehabilitation plan for A, B, and D, with the exception that under A, the school would be Las Alturas.
Is there a second?
Second.
I'd like to move to amend. I'd like to amend, the amendment would be to expel the student, but not for the year, but for a semester, and the rest of the rehabilitation plan remain as stated.
As indicated by Ms. Parker?
What?
As indicate, the rest to remain as Ms. Parker indicated in her motion?
As is in the hearing panel.
Okay, so it's different. Okay. Is there a second for that motion? Well, I'll second it.
Don't we have to ask the maker of the motion to accept the amendment?
No, you
No.
vote on the amendment.
You go in backward order. You vote on the amendment and return back to
Oh,
the original
okay.
motion. Okay. So all those in favor of the amendment signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed?
No.
Okay, so now we're back to our original motion. All those in favor of the motion made by Ms.
Can I amend the motion?
Of course. Move to amend.
Move to amend, that we.
Can I remind board members that it's okay to just vote no on something,
Yeah.
rather than trying to tweak things in a million different ways to reach
Technically not.
consensus? Anyway, go ahead.
Yeah, but it's okay to amend also.
Absolutely.
That we expel for this semester and then ending the end of January, and then Los Alturas for the next semester.
Second.
Okay. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
No.
No. Okay, we're back to where we started. And I'm sorry, I'm not keeping track of those for you very well. Do you have the,
I don't have all the details in that first.
I can actually, okay.
But I have, who made the motion?
Okay, so we're back to the original motion. You want to restate it, Ms. Parker?
Move to suspend the expulsion and move the student to Las Alturas through June 30th, 2008, and follow the existing rehabilitation plan proposed by the administrative hearing panel for A, B, and D, with the exception that under A, the school would be Las Alturas.
Okay. And the second was by Ms. Cordero. Okay. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed?
No.
No. So it passes 3-2. Okay. Now on to 0708-16.
Move to uphold the findings and recommendations of the hearing panel, which is a suspended expulsion.
Second?
So motion by Ms. Parker, second by Cordero. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? So it passes 5-0. 0708-10.
Move to approve the finding and recommendations of the hearing panel.
So Cordero and Malakoff, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, I didn't hear ayes on all five.
Aye.
Sorry, aye.
Oh, thank you. Okay, I'm sorry. Those silent ayes. So it passes 5-0. 0708-11.
Move to approve the findings and recommendations of the hearing panel.
So Cordero and Malakoff, all those in favor signify by saying aye. It passes 5-0. So now we are on to our conference agenda. And the first item is a report on basic aid projection assumptions and board consideration of options. Dr. Sarvis?
At our last meeting, we had a report on basic aid projections that had been prepared by Meg Jete from the County Education Office. And you'll see on the attachment, the one page which lays out year by year where we would probably be next year, 2008-09, the following year, 2009-10, the following year, 2010-11, and so forth, based on certain assumptions. Under these assumptions, the district will cross the funding threshold from revenue limit to basic aid at the 2010-2011 school year. However, we know that all of those assumptions will change as the facts become known, and as we get closer to that date, we'll get better refinement as to when we might cross that threshold. Right now, we think it may be 2010, 2011. I'd like to speak to each of three issues for just a moment, and then I'd like to hear from the board, because what we haven't done is to have the board weigh in on it and give us direction. The first is that the assumptions used for the projection will be refined as the actual numbers become known, which may shift the date one way or the other. The second is that the board should consider options that might affect some of the factors, or could consider options that might affect some of the factors used to calculate the district's revenue. And I'd like to hear from the board whether you do want to consider those options or whether you don't. And third, the board should consider its position on inter-district transfer students and make it known to parents as early as possible, so that parents are not caught unaware. I know that in another district, some of the decisions about stopping new transfer students were not finalized until, I believe, April. And that was awfully late for our parents to hear that their child wouldn't be allowed to transfer into that district the following year. So I'd like to speak to each of those for just a moment. First of all, the assumptions used for the projection will be refined as the actual numbers become known. Examples, I'd like to give you 5 different examples of how this might occur. First of all, we know that student enrollment at our non-charter elementary schools has been dropping. We know it's been dropping by some 2 to 3% a year. In fact, we've gone back over those numbers just recently. If that rate of decline drops, in other words, the rate of decline diminishes to just half the level, say a 1.5% decline each year, especially as charter schools reach their capacity, the date of the change to basic aid status may move back 1 year. So it may become 2011-12 instead of 2010-11. And the level I determined was a change of just a 3% decline in enrollment to only 1.5% decline in enrollment. That's not much of a change to change a full year our economic status. Secondly, if the district accelerates the 3% decline, and other districts have done this, other districts have decided to stop transfers, and if we purposely accelerate the 3% decline by halting new inter-district transfer students, those are inter-district, those are students coming into our district from other school districts, the date of the change to basic aid status may actually move up a year to 2009, 2010. It wouldn't take very much of a change to move it up a year. On the other hand, if both of these things happened, if we decided to stop new transfers and yet our decline, our normal decline rate was diminished, then the date of the change to basic aid status may remain the same, 2010, 2011. Let me give you a couple of others. If the state COLA increases drop from some 3 to 4% to 2%, and there is talk now at the state about a 0 COLA for next year, we'll see. But if it drops to just 2%, the date of the change to basic aid status may move up 1 year to 2009, 2010 in these calculations on the sheet that you see. On the other hand, a decline in the current property tax increase, which is pegged at 6.7%. And you remember Meg Jeté saying, well, that's the current rate. The county, in giving us a projection, said that's the current rate. We'll give you no other projection other than the current rate, so 6.7%. If that were to increase, or if there was a decline in that, it may shift the change of basic aid status back 1 or more years to 2011-12 or later 2012-13. So any of those factors, changes in any of those factors and any of those assumptions could have a major effect on our economic status, whether we're basic aid or whether we're revenue limit district. Secondly, most of the factors used for the calculations are outside our district's control. The state of the California economy, property tax increases, well, it's just a number of factors. However, the board may consider options such as halting new interdistrict transfers and discussions with other districts to allow transfers through an MOU. Other districts have done this. In fact, Kate Parker found an MOU between 2 school districts on the peninsula and the Bay Area that allowed transfers, one of them being basic aid, the other not. And it was to take, the MOU is to take effect at the point at which they both became basic aid districts. Even discussions with charter schools regarding the conversion of their charter status, which we've had some fairly minor discussions with charters about. The point being that if the district becomes basic aid, the district may reap solid benefits. The charter schools would continue to be funded as charter schools and on a revenue limit basis. In general, other South Coast school districts seeking to accelerate the change to basic aid status have experienced some economic hardship prior to becoming basic aid. So as districts like Hope and Goleta squeezed down to lower levels to ensure their basic aid status, they ran into real difficulties. And they were able to survive those difficulties, but it was not comfortable.
The transition, you mean?
During that transition, yes. Carpinteria, on the other hand, has decided to let the assumptions play out of their own accord. And I basically agree that we should not try to accelerate the change, especially the enrollment decline. But if the board has other feelings, then I need to know about it, and we need to start discussing that now. Because item number 3, which is letting parents know, I think is most important. Let me just lay out this consideration. I think it is instructive to look ahead at the point at which we are a basic aid district, and I'd like to make these points. We will no doubt be the last South Coast district to become basic aid. It looks like Carpinteria and Hope will become basic aid sometime very soon. We will probably be the only district still accepting inter-district transfer students, and there may be considerable pressure on our district to continue to accept transfers. Where else can parents take their children? The question is, other than their home district, which may be Ventura, which may be Buellton, and of course what we're getting right now is that it may be Goleta. The question is, what position do we want to take vis-a-vis transfer students, and how soon will we let the parents know that? My advice is that we should decide early rather than at the last minute. Here are some options the board may want to consider on transfer students. And I just have 3 here, but there are others. Do you want to signal the intent not to accept transfer students in advance of becoming basic aid? Or do you want to wait until we become basic aid, then make a decision? Do you want to stop accepting new transfers who do not have siblings enrolled in the district in advance of becoming basic aid? Do you want to pursue MOUs with other districts to either transfer funding or to exchange transfer students with other districts? And I think we should have those discussions early enough so that parents know what's going to happen in the future.
When you mentioned pressure, could you talk about that a little bit? What do you mean by pressure?
Well, I can well imagine a packed board meeting of parents who are coming into the district with their children, just as happened in the Hope School District, trying to keep the door open for their children to be enrolled in our district.
Actually, I guess when I went through this, what I would really like to see to facilitate the level of discussion you suggested in your final points is to see the chart that was prepared by Meg Jeté with some other assumptions built in so that we could see how it would play out. And of course, the biggest assumption would be with transfers or without transfers, or with transfers. I don't know how you would sort this out, the transfers who have no siblings coming in. I don't know how you would sort that piece out, but you could easily do with and without. The question is, do we want to let it occur naturally? For me, the biggest question is, do we want to let it occur on its own? Or are we willing to take some really difficult year, 2 years, 3 years, financial years with stringent budget cutting in order to pressure the leap into basic aid status? So I guess I'd really like to see how many bad years could there potentially be. Yeah.
Well, you know, we could be updating this every couple of months, and in fact, we probably should. Eric Smith and I have talked about updating it by our projections for a declining enrollment based upon a cohort analysis of the decline and based on birth rates 6-7 years prior. Well, I guess it's only 5 years prior, isn't it? It does hit awfully quickly. Yes. And in fact, that's what I did when I looked at each of these assumptions individually. I said, well, how much of a change would we need to get in this assumption to move us just 1 year, to move it 1 year up or 1 year out? And my guess is that regardless of the assumptions we use, the other assumptions may well override. For instance, state COLA. Oh, there's a big one. I really don't know what's going to happen to the state COLA. You want to turn your microphone on?
My intuition tells me that state COLA is going to be less or deficited, one of the two. So in that particular case, less state aid means you get to basic aid quicker, assuming all the other assumptions remain constant in terms of AB growth. And then whether you accelerate your decline of enrollment and whether it's organic or deliberate, that has, repercussions with regard to how fast you get to basic aid as well. The one thing that I had this conversation with Cabinet is that in your elementary district, because your revenue limit is below the statewide average, so technically you're a low wealth district, what that means is that when you cross the revenue limit threshold in aggregate, you're still not as well off as an elementary district that's a revenue limit with a high revenue limit. So what that tells you is that your basic aid entitlement in the aggregate, it's going to take you a while to sink into basic aid status where you really have the purchasing power of an elementary district with a high revenue limit or a revenue limit that doesn't exist because your AV is so great.
Or a charter school.
Well, I didn't say that, but but that's a consideration.
Other questions?
We have people, students who transfer out of our district into Ventura and so forth.
Yes.
Is that number considerably less than the people transferring
Oh,
in?
Yes.
much less, yes.
So that if we were to stop transfers, would they also stop? I mean, would there be any reason for them to also stop transfers? So that we would also gain people back?
Well, the incentive for other districts
Is not the
is not big at all, unless it's that they're about to cross the threshold themselves,
Like Carpinteria?
like Carpinteria, or Hope,
In which case, they would do it anyway, so.
yes.
Yeah, and I think an important consideration is as you're dealing with, the subset of districts that's basic aid, and that's the anomaly. Almost everybody's revenue limit, and 50% of the districts in the state of California are in enrollment decline. So there's definitely a battle over ADA.
Yeah, go ahead, Ms.
A couple things for me. One is that something that we haven't talked about is that whether we start closing to transfers and try to accelerate the move into basic aid or not, I really think that we need to be looking at our minimum reserve for economic uncertainties, because we are going to become basic aid probably at some point, with or without it being artificial. And that economic reserve needs to be higher, in my opinion, in order to mitigate the risks, the financial risks, as we go through that process and possibly pop in and out of basic aid. So I'm concerned about that. And the other thing for me is I know that some of our districts around us have suddenly close to transfers, and I'm a little concerned that if there isn't, I would prefer there to be a transitional process, and I'd hate to see us get to the point where, ooh, we're basic aid this year and that's it. We're going to grandfather in those sixth graders maybe. Everybody else, you're gone. And I could see there being community pressure once you're in that situation of saying, you're literally taking money from our students, from our in-district students, by still having transfers. And so I'm concerned about that process. That's something else that's weighing on my mind, because I would much prefer there to be a gradual process of it, but I don't think we're financially in a place where we could do that now.
Well, Ms. Parker touched on one comment or one concern that I had, which was, but it ties in with the request that I have, and that is when we look at updating the chart that we saw previously, I was wondering if we could maybe get some kind of a list, perhaps, of what would be the advantages and disadvantages of trying to accelerate our move, sort of artificially accelerating the move to basic aid versus arriving there organically. And one of my concerns is I would be hesitant or at least concerned about trying to accelerate it before we have a sufficient reserve in place in case we do hit that fluctuation that everybody talks about of going back and forth. And so accelerating it too quickly could be troublesome if we haven't had a chance to build that up. So I would be really interested in seeing what would be the pros and cons of trying to accelerate.
I think the other thing Board Member Parker touched on is the issue with becoming basic aid and on that cusp is, remember, when you become basic aid, you no longer have prior year guarantee. So that's what makes it problematic is, in your revenue limit, you're guaranteed what you got last year, and then basically the prior year guarantee allows you theoretically to make reductions in expenditures commensurate with your loss in revenue. When you pop in and out of basic aid, that's an issue. So once you're deep into basic aid, it's no longer an issue, but when you're riding the cusp, it is an issue.
Not only do you not have prior year guarantee, but you don't have the supplemental tax.
Your supplemental taxes go away, and then any add-ons you had onto the revenue limit, which I don't think are significant in the elementary, although you have some significant ones in the high school, those go away as well too.
Well, And also, I guess, I mean, I probably don't need to remind board members, but if you're talking about trying to increase the 3% reserve, we've been barely making the 3% reserve in the elementary. And if you're talking about trying to increase the reserve in anticipation of riding these fluctuations, then you're talking about making budget cuts. So that's a reality. So it's something to bear in mind when we, work our way through the budget making chart. If we're talking about trying to increase that reserve, then we are talking about making cuts to programs.
Right. That was exactly why I wanted to look at the pros and cons of doing it, to see if the pros really warrant
Right.
having to deal with, something that drastic.
Well, I think another thing, a significant variable will be when the governor unveils the budget. If the COLAs are much, not only in 08, 09, but are projected to be much lower, then that's going to basically ripple through all your calculations, and you might be there sooner than you thought without having to do anything. As long as AV continues to grow at the pace they think it's going to grow here, which, interestingly enough, I think those AV calculations are very similar to the FCMAT report in 2005, because I did that portion of that report.
Huh.
So,
Well, that may be, a key marker for us when we get to the governor's budget.
We could do a number of things. The COLA projection is a huge assumption here. Our enrollment decline, whether it changes or whether we force a change, is another big issue to us. For instance, Eric and I, in looking into the numbers, do not think that we will continue to have a 3% enrollment decline. We think it will be much less than that. Now, that'll be interesting to see how that one's borne out. But if we took something that we think is closer to the reality of our current enrollment, because we have pretty good preliminary CBEDS counts right now on our fall enrollment, and we think we know where those are going. But if we took out, say, one grade level's worth of transfers, as you might do, for example, if you said we will not be accepting new transfer students into kindergarten next year, then we could show you the same calculations with new projected COLA, with our numbers reflecting changes in the enrollment decline, and the other that I just talked about.
May I make a suggestion? January 29th was the proposed oral report to the board on the governor's proposed budget. Could we have a companion conference item with the new projections based on the new COLA from the governor's proposed budget? And then the fall ADA numbers that might indicate some sort of enrollment trend?
Sure.
And then figure in transfers or no transfers or no new kindergarten transfers. I doubt that we'd get to it before that anyway, but we'll have some really solid information from Sacramento at that point, it sounds like. Everybody's saying yes. Okay.
I just wanted to ask, I know the answer, but I'm not sure it's clear to anyone watching or listening to this, because we keep talking about the district. The district we're talking about is the elementary.
Elementary district, very
Would
good.
you like to say a word or two about the high school district?
The high school district is probably 12 to 15 years out. At the high
How
school,
long?
12 to 15 years. At the high school level, our revenue limit for our high school students yields another $1,000 per student, more than it does for our elementary students. So just that difference alone counts for the reason that the high school budget is often stronger, is almost always stronger than the elementary budget, and why we wouldn't cross that threshold for a number of years to come. Despite the fact that we have elementary districts all around us that feed into the high school district that are already basic aid. I mean, the property tax revenue in this area is great.
Okay. So now we are on our break. And then we will continue with item F2 when we come back. So, quick break. Start up again.
Sure.
I go, thanks. Okay, we're on to item F2, consideration of changes to elementary district, interdistrict transfer policy.
Well,
which
item
was part of-
F2 is really a follow-up to the item that we just had. And having heard your discussion, we'll be returning a report with new basic aid projections in January. And I know that you have not had board consideration of a parcel tax at this point. I mean, we've had presentations and discussion, but my reason for putting this on was that I didn't want to over-anticipate the board's response or reaction to any of those discussions. If, for example, you thought you wanted to go to a parcel tax this next year, I know that other school districts have found great difficulty in staging a parcel tax when they have a lot of transfers coming into their district. If, for example, you wanted to accelerate the enrollment decline so that we could become basic aid sooner, then I would want to let parents know, and let parents know now. So I just put this on as a just-in-case item so that we would be fully agendized to be able to have that discussion if you wanted to have that discussion.
No, clearly we offered direction for the future. I just want to make one comment, and that is that I had a member of the public make a comment to me about the board proceeding with a parcel tax, and I don't think it's clear to community members that it was a group of community members who came to the board recommending a parcel tax, and the board has made no, has offered no direction.
Right.
Other than gathering more information about what might be involved. So I just wanted to make that clarification, that it was not a board recommendation to pursue it. The board is merely gathering information.
Good.
Okay. So then we're on to item F3, report on lottery proceeds.
And Eric Smith will make this report.
Superintendent Sarvis asked me to prepare a brief report on lottery proceeds and the collections within the district. By way of introducing this item, I think it's useful to look at the historical background. Proposition 37, which passed with a 58% majority in '84, established the Lottery Act, and we were the 21st state in the union to adopt a lottery. Some of the provisos of the Lottery Act were that 50% of the annual lottery proceeds had to be paid out in winnings, and at least 34% of the lottery proceeds had to be distributed to public education, and that's kindergarten through the state and college university systems. In 2000, voters passed Proposition 20, which required any increases, or 50% of any increase over the base amount as compared to 97-98, to be used only for instructional materials purposes. So now we have this bifurcated system where we have lottery proceeds where a portion of it can be used for what was prescribed in the original Lottery Act initiative, and then another portion that can only be used for instructional materials. A couple of misconceptions about lottery. Lottery does not fund a significant amount of educational expenses either at the macro or micro level. As you can see that in 2005, 2006, on a statewide basis, the lottery constituted less than 2% of all revenue for K-12 school districts. And you can see by our own accounts in 06-07, lottery proceeds represented less than 2% of the district's combined general fund revenue. The other issue with lottery is lottery proceeds are volatile. They're volatile because they're subject to fluctuations due to the introduction of new games and the fact that they can spike and drive up sales and then taper back down. They've also declined due to the increase in Indian gaming Indian gaming compacts, and that's had a negative effect as well. And as you look at lottery over time, you can see that it's fluctuated from $90 per ADA to more than $175 per ADA over the life of the lottery, with the $175 per ADA being at the beginning when the lottery proceeds were just enacted. When you look at our own situation, you can see that the financial dartboard for 07-08 projects that lottery proceeds will be $133 per ADA this year, with $121 of that being unrestricted and $22 of it being the restricted for instructional materials per Proposition 20. Over the last 3 years, you can see that combined totals, we've collected about $2,000,001 in 04-05, $2,000,002 in 05-06, and $2,175,000 in 06-07. And the reason for those variances are both due to the fluctuations in annual ADA, which lottery is calculated on, and also the fluctuations in the rate itself. So you have both of those variables that basically result in fluctuations among proceeds collected by districts. So this was a kind of a brief primer on lottery proceeds, and I'd be more than happy to answer any questions.
Go ahead, Ms. Parker.
Mine's just on Proposition 20. It's been 7 years, and I do not remember the thinking behind that. Why did that happen? Or why was it proposed as a good idea?
Why is any initiative proposed? I wonder about the process, and I don't want to get in a debate with board member Noel, but, when Hiram Johnson envisioned the initiative and the referendum and the recall, I don't think the initiative process has played out exactly how he envisioned it.
But usually there's some impetus. Was this the idea that the state wouldn't tap its own resources for instructional materials that would just come from the lottery money?
No, I believe this was an initiative that was, it was not a referendum, it was an initiative from the electorate. So I guess there was a perception, and as you know, there is many school districts, there's a perception that there's not enough instructional materials, and in some cases, due to the Williams Act and things like that, that was actually the case. And so what happens is we end up, as districts collectively paying for the sins of a few. And so we end up having, proceeds that were pretty much, I would say, semi or quasi unrestricted, a proportion of them being restricted. And when we have, in my mind, all too much restricted revenue to begin with.
Go ahead.
In 2006-07, it was $1,000,008. What did we spend that money on?
I knew you were going to ask me that question. I don't know that off the top of my head. Shirley, do you have a breakdown of how we... I know that in some cases,
I just want to give you a general categories where we spent our lottery money last year, and the bulk of that is really for the to fund the subs, the substitute teachers, because and also at the same. Remember the year before we were written up for using money, the lottery money for custodial supplies. And that was really the funds that we were allocating to the sites to purchase their custodial and their office supplies. And so following year, in 05-06, we stopped them from having that. We were using general fund money. And since that, I don't know exactly the amounts related to that, but in order to fund or to cover for the general money that was used for custodial supplies for the sites, we have them pick up a portion of the substitute cost in the different sites.
So there are actually restrictions on it. It has to be for instructional material.
It has to be for
instruct-
not just instructional materials, it's for instructions, not for general office or capital acquisition. You know, we're not supposed to buy equipment with lottery money.
But you could
those
buy,
things.
you could put it in with the teachers to pay for salaries or
You can
anything
pay
Yeah.
for salaries, anything
You can
that
pay for salaries and
basically
benefits.
achieves an instructional purpose. And there's specific prohibitions relative to acquisition of real property, a few other
Makes sense.
things. But in most cases, you know, it's generally considered unrestricted income with those few exceptions. And the California School Accounting Manual, with the exception of the Proposition 20 portion of it, is treated as unrestricted.
Because they're restricted.
I wrote an article about this a couple of years ago, and I want to commend the district under Dr. Sarvis's leadership for cleaning up this act, because the district had been using lottery funds for contracting for gardener services, and they were paying, the district was paying the rent for OAS, some $200,000 in rent coming out of lottery funds, which explicitly are prohibited for use for land or real estate purposes. That the last time I checked, this is not happening anymore, and I think it's really good and in keeping with the spirit of the initiative that brought the lottery into being. One thing, it's much more difficult to make the judgment on a case-by-case basis, but there is a supplement, not supplant rule for the lottery funds as well. That is also in the initiative, the language of the initiative, and the language of the what became the act. And what Ms. Corpus was describing, for example, would have been supplementing or supplanting rather than supplementing, and would have been improper. So it's pretty good to hear that those funds are now being used more appropriately, although eternal vigilance.
Other comments by board members? I'm sorry. Okay,
Thank you.
thank you very much. Now we are on to item F4, update on the progress of EduSoft implementation in the secondary district.
I've asked for an update on EduSoft. As the board knows, data analysis, the use of common assessments and frequent assessments to monitor student performance are constant themes in the research literature. Products like EduSoft carry the promise of fulfilling these needs. Now, I was not familiar with EduSoft. I know some other testing products very well, products like Abacus, for example, which allowed districts to build common assessments and to use them frequently. In this presentation, I've asked for not only an update on where we are in our use of EduSoft, but to take a step back and discuss how we adopted EduSoft in the first place. And with that, we have Michael Gonzalez, and is Cynthia here for that report? Dr.
Correct.
White is here for that report as well.
We're
Good, thank
we're
you.
actually stepping in for Paul Turnbull, who wasn't able to join us tonight. By way of background, I remind you that in the year 2006, the state sent a categorical program monitoring team to evaluate a number of different programs. One of the areas that they did a rather thorough review was of our English Learner program. You may recall that prior to 2006, we were what's called a comité district. That is to say that the district was found out of compliance with their instructional program for English learners for some time. As a result of the 2006 CPM visit, we signed an agreement with the State Department of Education to institute a system for monitoring the performance of our English learners. We then set about trying to find a tool that was appropriate for our secondary schools to track the progress of students. At the same time, we had established, I guess now 3 years ago, a LEAP team. You may recall that the local educational agency plan is the foundation for how a district is going to increase the proficiency levels of students who are not proficient in English language arts and mathematics. Using that team, we evaluated 4 different assessment systems and finally settled on EduSoft as the best tool to help meet our needs to assess our students. I will share with you that on that LEAP team was teachers and administrators from every single secondary school. And it was that group that made a decision to recommend to the board that we purchase EduSoft. In October 2006, we brought forth that proposal, and the proposal was approved by the board. In attachment F4, you will find the cost for that program. Initially, it was the first year. It did cost us $116,000. 70% of that came from the targeted instructional improvement block grant, and 30% came out of the economic impact aid grant that the district receives. So that's the background for how we got to choosing the EduSoft instrument. I'm not going to go through the details of the attachment. I've summarized it in what I think might be a better chart, and I've distributed that chart for you folks, showing you actually where are we with EduSoft right now. And so I draw your attention to this document labeled Use of EduSoft to Monitor the Progress of English Learners on Grade Level ELD, English Language Development, and ELA, English Language Arts Standards. And what we're talking about is a way to monitor standards-based instruction. So we began this year in earnest. In August, the instructions were in grades 7 through 12 that we wanted all of our English learners who were enrolled in 2 kinds of courses. High Point courses, which are the instructional material used in our English language development classes, or what we used to call ESL. We asked that the students be assessed in there, and then we also have English learners who are in our regular English program, the Holt series. We asked that all of the secondary schools assess the students to establish a benchmark, to actually establish 2 things. One was to generate a baseline data of where they are, but 2, also to determine if the students were appropriately placed. Please remember that the whole purpose of this was a way to monitor our English learners' performance. It's often said that we were involved with a process that was filled with hope, i.e. we waited to the results of the California standards test to determine how well our students were performing. The state said, you can't continue to do that. That was the basis for establishing a benchmark system. Benchmarks simply are measures at a certain time of the year to see how are our students doing. And our measures are based on the quarter system. So in August, we had the first benchmark. In October, we, 2 months ago, or 1 month ago, we completed the first quarter benchmark for High Point for students enrolled in not only High Point Basic, but also High Point A, High Point B, and High Point C. That refers to instructional levels. We also had students who were in the Holt series take that first quarter exam. The purpose was, as stated up on this chart, was to determine how English learners are progressing towards English proficiency on grade level standards for ELD standards and ELA standards. What we expected was, as a result of those assessments, that teachers would begin in their professional learning communities to take a look at the data, inform their instruction, and do the appropriate intervention strategies that are required. We are next expecting that in January we'll do what's called the midterm benchmark for High Point A through C, and we'll do the Holt midterm exam. And again, what that is simply a measure to tell us how well are students progressing on standards-based instruction, which is what the CST is based on. The outcome of that, or the action, is we hope that teachers will determine what students can be accelerated. And for example, what does that exactly mean? Well, currently we have some students, for example, who are enrolled in double periods of English, double periods of ELD, or double periods of ELA. If the students have sufficiently, are making good progress, satisfactory progress, we may be able to move these students out of a double period English class and move them into a single period English class, and thereby give them an opportunity to participate in another class, an elective class. You may recall that we've had a number of conversations how on the importance of opening up the elective program to students who are struggling, and so this is our attempt to do so. In March, we'll have the third quarter benchmark, and again, what that's designed to do is our students on track. Right, a month, 2 months later, they'll be involved in the California standards testing, and what we expect is, again, intervention. It'll be a very critical point to determine how well our students are going to do on the California Standards Test. And then again in June, we'll be having the final benchmark test, or the end of term exam for Holt. And what our hope is that the data that we gather from that is going to determine what kinds of instructional changes at the schools do we need to do. What programmatically, what do we need to revise or take a look at, or provide additional supports? In addition, that information will be used to give students and their parents a proper recommendation about what kind of English class the students should enroll in the following year. So this is a very brief synopsis of what the benchmarks, what the monitoring program for English learners currently looks like in our district. We're required on December 2nd to submit this system to the State Department for their approval, and we believe that we will get their approval as a long-needed way to assess the progress of our English learners.
Michael, could you say something more about the selection? I didn't know anything about how we ended up with EduSoft. I mean, I sort of knew at the time that there was a process, and I know that Davis Hayden told me there was a representative committee that had been composed, and could you describe that?
Sure, of course. As I shared with you, we had 3 years ago, we had put together a LEAP team made up of teachers and administrators from the secondary schools, all the secondary schools. These teachers were usually the Title I coordinators, or the chairs of the ELD departments, or the ELA departments, and the math departments. And so we got these teachers together, and we met with them on a monthly meeting all day long, actually. What we did is we brought representatives from 4 different agencies, and I'll have you take a look at the first page of attachment F4. And you can see under background that what we looked at was a system by Pulliam out of the ETS folks, the Educational Testing Service. We took a look at an assessment system that CD McGraw-Hill was using. We had representatives from DataWorks come to us, and we took a look at representatives from EduSoft. The teachers, who were the majority of this committee, took a look at each of those systems and went back to their sites and said, what will do us the most good? I will share with you that these are not easy systems to become accustomed to. But in the end, we decided that EduSoft, with the appropriate training, would be the system that we would agree to. And that's what we've done. And we've discovered, as we do with all new systems, some disadvantages and some advantages. The disadvantages is that anytime you introduce a new set of software to the school sites, you're going to have all those associated technological problems. Second of all, it's a new way of looking at student monitoring. It's not an easy system. But essentially what EduSoft is, it's a bank of tests that are standard-based that teachers can draw on and give students very short exams that they can use to see how are my students doing. These benchmarks are system-wide because they permit us here at the district to monitor the performance of all English learners throughout the district. But every teacher, using the test questions that are available, that are again are standards-based, can make mini checks as often as they want. And there's a huge number of tools associated with EduSoft that I'm not going to go into detail with you today. But I share with you that the principal purpose behind that is what you see up on the screen, to give us a way to measure on a quarterly basis how our students are performing. So we're not surprised at when the CST results come out. We're not actually looking at, I should share with you that we're not actually measuring CELT on this, with this thing. As you know, our district continues to exceed, the secondary district continues to exceed the target set up by No Child Left Behind using the CELT test. However, we are struggling with the targets set up with ELA standards, and that's what we're focusing on here, and we're focusing on that particular element because the state said that's what you need to do.
Questions so far? Go ahead, Ms. Malco.
The questions from EduSoft are, I take it, multiple choice questions. Is that right? They're a Scantron, and they answer them multiple choice?
Yes, there is, yes.
So that if teachers were interested in doing a writing sample or something, that's completely separate?
Well, yes and no. You are correct about EduSoft, but within the High Point, these are curriculum-based. The benchmarks you're looking at here are curriculum-based, i.e. they reflect the instruction inherent in the materials that we're using in our ELD programs and our HOLT programs. There are essays attached to that. However, we're not requiring, many schools are actually using writing samples or essays as part of their assessment process, but that's not a current requirement for us right now. Right now, what we're looking at is the completion, true or false kinds of stuff that gives us the measures that we can look at across all of our schools. But there is essay writing that is available in these benchmark programs.
Mm-hmm. So the questions come on, I assume it's Scantrons, and we have it comes with the Scantron machine, which calculates it all?
Yes, and I shared with you that anytime you buy a new technology, you have difficulties. We encountered problems with the Scantron machines that we had not anticipated, with the printers that we had not anticipated, but we're working those things out. I share with you quite openly that, as you folks know, it takes about 3 years of implementation before we get the kind of product we want. This is really our first year of implementation.
And each site, is it just the high schools, or is it also the junior highs that have
the junior highs and the high schools?
So they all have each site must then have a Scantron machine?
Correct, as well as printers.
Thank
So right now, it's only English learners not regular English language arts students.
Well, let me go back. Right now, the CPM requirement is for us to monitor English learners. However, you will find that at many of our schools, all the students who are enrolled in Holt are being asked to take those benchmark tests. And that's an okay thing. I mean, it's in keeping with with standards-based instruction and monitoring. But I want to be very clear that our current requirement, our current agreement with the state is that we're going to monitor English learners. You will find in attachment F4 that the math teachers have embraced EduSoft. And you will find in there that eventually we will ask science teachers and social studies teachers to also get involved with benchmarking. Indeed, that is the only way that we can actually predict, so to speak, how well our students are progressing.
Well, and obviously for English language arts, that's the only time that you're going to have English learners sort of neatly packaged in classes together, since they will be in all sorts of different classes. I mean, you may have CDI classes, but other than that, you're going to have all other high levels of English learners. So I think it's great that other students are hopefully going to benefit from EduSoft. Benchmarking, it's tied into the textbook, but can the departments create their own benchmark tests?
Let me share with you that the answer is yes, but I will share with you that the development of assessments that are valid and reliable is a very high art that requires very specific training. For example, we met with the LEAD team yesterday, and we had a group of English high school teachers who requested, are they able to do just what you described? And we asked them to send a proposal that we'll consider.
Okay. And I'm not surprised when I visit sites, and I've been talking to secondary teachers, and I'm hearing a lot of frustration with the technical glitches and just sort of getting used to the idea of this and the changes that it means in the classroom. And I guess it is just a process, and I would love to hear more information about how you're addressing it. If teachers are spending hours and hours trying to get the machine to accept their Scantrons and it's rejecting it, or they have to completely redo things again and again. I mean, it's obviously having impacts on their workday. So I would like to know that that's getting better, but I don't know if it is yet.
Our hope is that it will get better. I do not want to mislead you. It is initially a very difficult system. Anytime you begin to do a monitoring district-wide, no matter what kind of software we use, it's going to be difficult. I will share with you that we also need, though this very clearly is a secondary system, we're also obligated to do the same kind of monitoring at the elementary level. We're just starting those conversations now, and I wouldn't want to go beyond that. I would defer to Robin for that, but it's actually a K-12 requirement.
It sounds as though you're, since I don't know what other wheels are out there, I have to say, it sounds like you're reinventing the wheel. When I hear, boy, when you talk about developing assessment instruments that are reliable and valid, yes, I understand what that means. And who on our staff has that kind of expertise? Last time this issue came up, we went to Shane Jimerson for it, and he could provide for his tests. I forget the name of it.
Oral J.
Yeah, he could provide. I asked for. I thought, and I didn't expect to get him reliability and validity studies, and came in campus mail. There they were. I got them. That's a big deal, and I didn't know that we were undertaking that in this project. I think the last time I asked questions about it was going to be, we were going to use assessments that came along with the programs.
But I thought Mr. Gonzalez was saying that that is what the norm is, right? That it's just if teachers want to try. What were you saying in response to my question?
That is correct, but this tool permits us to analyze those assessments that are tied into the instructional materials that we're using.
But isn't
And,
it- I don't
and,
understand. This-
and it provides teachers with a bank of standards-based questions that they can use at any time within their instructional days to determine, are the students getting that particular standard that they're working on?
Who generates that pool?
EduSoft does.
They generate the item pool.
Yes, they have generated the
And they
item
do-
bank.
And they do the validity and reliability testing of that?
Correct.
That was not clear. And it's aligned with California standards.
Correct.
And these
In
assess-
ELA and ELD.
in ELA and with the ELD standards. What
Correct.
about math?
And math that I shared with you, we're just beginning, and
No, but
as
no, forget the just beginning. Are the math is the math item pool equally aligned with California
yes,
math standards?
as are science and social studies
Okay.
that we've
No,
not yet.
and we're just beginning to start to use the math. Okay. Got
Correct.
It, got it. So this application is directed toward Part B of the two-part mandate for English learners, A being that they learn the English language, and B being that they learn the core curriculum simultaneously.
Correct.
Okay. And how do we monitor the A, Part A?
The Part A is the English proficiency.
That's
This
the self-test?
this is the tool. As we expand the tool.
You lost me on it. Part A is the development of mastery of the English language per se.
Correct.
And I thought you mentioned the CELT test as the assessment instrument for that.
What I shared with you is that we are not looking at the CEL test in this assessments. We are gearing up here. We are looking at the California Standards Test. The question is, why are we doing that? The reason we're doing that is that it's very, very clear that mastery on the CELT takes you to about the 5th grade level, which is insufficient for mastery. There's a huge gap between being proficient as measured by the CELT and being proficient.
I got you, but let me put my question differently because you're
Okay.
not answering it. Is there an item pool for English language skill?
There is an item pool for English language development
There is a-
standards
Okay.
as well as English language arts.
Okay. That
Correct.
That answered my question. And the implementation issues that Mrs. Parker raises. What exactly is expected of the teachers in this? Hearing stories about people messing around with Scantron machines, I mean, that's a very old and primitive technology. That shouldn't be a problem.
Well, it turns out to be a problem. What can I tell you? But essentially, one of the things that we've done is we've given some additional time to 2 teachers, a teacher from San Marcos High School and a teacher from Santa Barbara High School, who have a gift for EduSoft to do training throughout the district. And these folks have been very effective in helping school sites get over those hurdles that are inherent in any new program.
Okay, my last question has to do with common exams, common benchmarks.
Mm-hmm.
Since they all come from, there's the mother of all item pools that everyone gets to use, right? But
Correct.
who decides which items?
Well-
Each individual teacher, or a department, or math teachers across the district?
Again, let me draw your attention back to these benchmarks. These benchmarks are coming out of the books that are being used in our English language development as well as our English language arts. These things are written as part of the textbooks.
So
As-
does that mean, yes, that there is these are common assessments?
correct.
Through- So ninth grade English learners are taking the same, are getting the same benchmark testing at each of the schools?
Correct.
In each of the subject matters?
Correct. And our current
That's-
struggle right now is to make sure that we have compliance with that we're asking for at least 80% of all English learners in High Point Basic, High Point A, High Point B, High Point C, and Holt to be involved in this benchmark testing. With that 80%, Davis Hayden, as well as the rest of the staff involved in this program, believes that we can begin to make good predictions about how well our students are progressing. As you know, the state currently requires a 95%, NCLB currently requires a 95% participation rate. We're starting a little bit more modestly and asking for 80%.
And you build a longitudinal data file?
Correct.
For each kid?
We have the ability to do it for each kid, each class, and each school.
Will you do it for each kid in each class?
Yes.
So you'll be able to look at each kid's personal growth?
Correct.
And how much change there has been from the beginning to the end, or how much value added in some sense?
Correct.
You've got an initial position and an, okay.
That is our goal, correct.
Okay, that's the goal. And you're into the year one.
Correct.
Good luck.
Thank you.
No, it sounds great.
Ms. Cordero?
Yeah, I don't want to draw this out any too much longer, but I just had I think a quick question. I hope it's a quick question, and that is you mentioned that the whole student body can benefit from this, and I was just wondering, because the cost is borne by two categorical funding sources, is there any problem with utilizing this for the general population?
Not at this time, but as we move, should we begin to benchmark all students, as you've indicated, we would run into issues related to proper use of categorical funds. But at this time, it's not an issue.
Okay, thank you.
Actually, my question's focused on implementation issues, and they've been asked and answered. The only remaining implementation question really is the cost being borne by individual sites. I mean, clearly we've seen a breakdown of what the expense is year 1, year 2, year 3, but sites are obviously contributing to support of the technology, and I know that sites are paying often for technology people out of their own categorical funds. Training costs for teachers you mentioned. I don't know where that funding is coming from, but it's in addition to the initial expense.
Currently, all costs involved with EduSoft are being borne by the districts with using TIG and EIA. There is no current cost to an individual school site, including staff development. And we hope we're able to continue that for some time.
Okay, I have to say that is a misperception of staff members, because it's been shared with me by a number of staff members that they're concerned about the costs that are being shifted, allegedly shifted by the district to sites. I'm just telling you, and it may not even be staff members who are currently involved in English language development.
I thank you for that.
But that is a perception, okay.
I thank you for that. That's an important thing to know.
Well, and certainly then I brought that perception to this presentation. So thank you for clarifying that, and we need to get the word out.
I've heard a number of strange things about this, and I've heard that I brought it to the district. In fact, I would have brought a much more expensive system to the district.
We have public comment on this item.
Mr. Wheeler.
Thank you. Once again, Santa Barbara Teachers Association, Lane Wheeler, and I have had a number of opportunities to speak with certificated staff, both teachers and counselors, about the use of this program. And I certainly understand the mandates that the district is under and applaud them for pursuing those mandates in an aggressive fashion. One of the things I would like to bring to this body is that while this program, as Mr. Gonzalez has stated, takes 3 years to implement, we really have gotten into a situation where I don't believe we have anchored ourselves in a successful way. Rather than doing a pilot to determine if this was the program we wanted to buy, then using a year to implement it on a very limited basis, we've bought a program that does not work as advertised, that has some glitches in it that are being overcome with additional hardware expenditures, additional software expenditures, additional training expenditures. And the most successful sites are using an on-site tech to either run the Scantron machines or to do training or to do additional support services for this system. I had a conversation with Mr. Turnbull last week about this, and he told me that new Scantron machines have been purchased, new computers have been purchased. So once again, I have sampled all the sites. I've heard in writing from 5 of the sites that are using this. I had a conversation with members out of a 6th site that are using it. I have heard some belief that the system will eventually work as people learn to use the system. As advertised and as the sheet in here that obviously is an Edusoft advertisement product alleges, it's not meeting this. I mean, this is, I find this a little bit insulting that this is actually put in here because it's the sticker on the side of the car that makes you want to buy it, and it's not, in fact, really what's being happening on site. So I have heard from probably 25 members of different secondary sites about specific elements that are not working. Let me highlight just a few of those. As I mentioned, hardware and software issues are out there. The hardware is being purchased, so someone is expending money on that, and I don't see that in the outlays that have been identified in this. So I would once again question, what are the real costs involved in this, including those tech people who at sites that are providing support for the systems. I talked to Mr. Turnbull about software glitches where once a student's enrolled, they have to be re-entered into the system to, they can't just be carried over. It's not a drop and drag kind of a program. They have to actually be re-identified, resubmitted into the system, and that those information pieces can't just be automatically carried over as a kid re-enrolls. Mr. Turnbull informed me that there's a software fix out there. It has to be purchased. And I said, is it purchased? And he said, we're going to get it, and we're going to get it in there. So hopefully that will once again eliminate a problem, but it still exists. As I said, the sites that have had the greatest level of success with this are sites that have a tech on site doing that Scantron insertions, and those seem to be, I haven't actually used it, so I don't know exactly what the problems are, but it seems to be monumental. And I've heard a number of people say, I've given the test on a Friday, and it's 6 o'clock on a Friday evening, and I'm still at school. I've waited in line to use the one computer terminal that allows me to do this, and then I get in there and the thing jams. Now, once again, it could be a user error, but pushing a system beyond to a next level of implementation before it's really mastered at this level just does not make sense. I really have concerns about increased workload. We have some real specific contractual language about workload for teachers, and I'm seeing this as an extension of that workload without the benefits that you would hope to have teachers have for their PLCs and for that data analysis. I know that Mr. Turnbull has been very forthright about providing the non-student rate for teachers who are doing the training. But once again, I don't know that that has been fully communicated to folks, because I'm hearing I haven't gotten the training, I didn't know I could get paid for the training, I'd like to get the training, I've asked another teacher who's done this to give me some training.
We're at time, Mr. Wheeler. You know, your comments are are very specific and very much need to be addressed. And I'm wondering if committing it to a memo to disseminate from Paul to Mr. Gonzalez and Dr. White might be the best way to do it, so that they actually have a checklist that they can go through and address.
I'm more than
point
happy
by
to do
point.
that. I've had a chance to talk to a couple of board members individually and let them know some of the concerns that are out there. I would really, just to sum up real quickly then, I would like to say, please don't commit this to the next level of implementation until we've truly seen that we have mastery of it at the level we are right now. Asking teachers in math and in history and science to begin to do this next year before we really have fully gotten to that level of proficiency seems foolhardy to me. And once again, I think it may be a violation of contract. So I will be happy to provide that information that I've accumulated in a written form. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Dr. Sarvis, I had one question for you. Sure. Would it be possible to have reports on these benchmark assessments mid-year so we can monitor what's happening? Some kind of a summary for us?
Certainly a summary. I would not in any way want to identify
No.
teachers, for example.
No, clearly not.
Because it is, okay.
But it'd be very interesting to see for us to be able to keep track of the progress. And included in the report's continued implementation problem.
Okay. Well, we are actually almost back on the times indicated on our agenda. And F5 was time permitting, so why don't we go with about 15 minutes, see where we get, and then make a decision whether or not we want to press on with that discussion.
Well, at the end of October, the board saw a report of comparable districts and administrative salaries that had been prepared at the request of the board. I'm bringing this back to you, asking for direction, because I am frankly concerned about attracting talented people for future openings in positions with salary ranges than the upper end that are significantly below comparable districts. Excuse me. The board knows that we're again looking for an assistant superintendent for business services. I've been in the district almost 7 years. We have now had 7 assistant superintendents for business services, or people in that role. That's quite a turnover. As I talked to a friend of ours, Anthony Bridges, for example, at FICMAT and people in school services, they tell me that for a district your size, and for a district that's a dual district, a joint resolution district, you should be trying to attract people in with an upper range that's over $150,000. Other districts pay more. That's it. High school principals. Every year we have hired a new high school principal, and the applicant, we have gotten lucky. The applicant pools have generally been shallow. I know that there are other factors. Some factors have to do with the timing as we go out for those. We, again, may be faced with looking for a high school principal this spring to go out again and advertise for a principal at a below market rate is a problem. There are other positions that this study identifies as having a high end that is below comparable districts. And my question to you is simple. Would you be interested, or would you provide direction on the possibility of moving selected positions to higher levels?
I guess
Yes.
I would like to throw that back to you. I guess I feel like I as a board member could have a much better discussion if I saw recommendations for specific positions and certain ranges. Because then I could say to you, well, gosh, I would have included this position, or I might not have included that one, or gosh, I think this range might still be a little bit low. But I do have one comment with regard to the study that was made, and that Tustin just seems like such an outlier. I'd just like to,
What? Oh,
Tustin
Tustin?
in terms of range was so high as compared to anything that we could realistically even accomplish, that I guess I'd like to throw out Tustin as a point of comparison.
I think Tustin also had the highest enrollment for
Okay.
that group of comparable districts.
I don't know if other board members have any feedback. Okay, go ahead.
The bottom end seems rather appropriate, and we're pretty much on target. And the problem is the top end. And whether it's just a matter of adding another step.
I just want to clarify, you mean high and low, just to use the same
Oh, yes,
terminology that's
yes,
on
yes,
the, okay.
yes. The low end seems, we're right where we're supposed to be. It's the high one that we're not equivalent. And somehow, perhaps adding another step, and I'd like to see that step be based on time in the district, something where it's 10 years in the district or something like that, that gets us up higher. That's my personal preference.
An
Wait a
alternative.
second, Dr. Noel, I think actually,
Oh, I'm
I
sorry.
saw.
I was just wanted to follow up with what Dr. Malikoff had to say, which is that it would be, this does just say low and high, so we don't know how many steps these equivalent districts have in their range. And that's information that I think that we need to have.
Go ahead, Ms. Cordero.
Well, sorry. I also want to agree with Ms. Harder that I would kind of like to see this maybe pared down a little bit with some recommendations, because it's a bit difficult for me to look at this and go through all these positions and decide which ones I think might need to be raised and how much, et cetera. And I would prefer to look at some recommendations, and then I might have some that as Ms. Harder said, I might have some that I would want to add, or some that I might have a question about. But that would be useful to me. And also, I feel like it would help me see what your vision is in terms of what you think the need is for the district, which you deal with on a much more day-to-day basis. So that would be useful to me, and I wouldn't want to make decisions until I see that. So I guess it's my comment.
Dr. Noel.
Yeah, I have a number of concerns. For example, you've mentioned two. You've mentioned high school principals and assistant superintendent for business.
Those are most on my mind, yes.
Yeah. I guess it would be a question, but can you raise one assistant superintendent scale without raising them all? Or is it a decision to do one, a decision to do them all? It has financial implications. And you don't need to answer that right now, but it is a concern. And that would be and then there's a more general version of that concern, is that when you start raising some in this scale, do you then create a problem and a set of expectations about raising all of them? So is one really, is this like the camel's nose under the tent, and then the whole camel is that the whole scale goes up, which could cost a lot of money, and I think we need to understand that. Something they do at the university that I mentioned it to you before, but I reflected on a little bit more. To give flexibility and part of what you're saying is you want to be responsive to a market. You want to be competitive in a market. And one way they do that in a number of institutions, but the university is the one I know best, is to have something they call overscale. So they don't necessarily mess around with the schedule at all, but simply it's within the I guess that would be the vice chancellor for faculty, but it's within their purview to negotiate, and departments can recommend. We want this person, and to get him or her, we have to pay overscale. Our structure doesn't fit well, but we don't want to lose this opportunity, and that kind of flexibility I rather like more than getting into what could be a you know, you pull one string and the whole thing is connected when you start to change the whole structure.
I actually like that idea, but it raises issues with how do you advertise the position? You know, you set out your salary schedule and you may not get any takers based on the salary range. And if you indicate, you know,
O-
100,000
OBO.
to 110, or best offer, there you go, or to be negotiated, I'm not sure where you go with that. I mean, I think we'd need to
There may
think
be,
this one
I
through.
don't, I haven't thought about that, and whether there's any legal constraints on how you'd advertise it, or whether you just say salary open. I don't know what the.
Right,
What the
okay.
rules of that would be.
Or what goes on in other districts. And probably it would be nice to get some feedback
Well,
from,
there's certainly a number of
Mr.
different
Smith.
ways to go about this. And Eric, you may want to comment on that as well. Once a comparability study is conducted, then one way to go about it is to take out the high, take out the low, take the average, go through and simply identify every position that's off of that mark by, 5% or something like that, and try and adjust those positions. That's a very objective way of doing it. My concern, well, having a schedule makes life very simple for most districts. And fooling with that schedule then puts pressure on every other position on the schedule. And there isn't one person sitting up here or down along that row or in the offices up here or site administrators who wouldn't say, well, I think I work very, very hard and this position ought to be compensated at a higher level. So I'd like you to consider repositioning my position or our positions at a higher level. So that becomes a problem. Many districts negotiate separately for assistant superintendents, and they have separate contracts. In fact, that's one of the things you see here. You don't see a high or a low from some of these districts for assistant superintendents, and that's because that's simply what this person is getting paid. They have a contract. They're not on the salary schedule, and their contracted amount is such and such. That is another way to go. Frankly, I don't care to move an assistant superintendent for business services ahead of educational services assistant superintendents. I can bring back recommendations about.
Say that again?
I don't care to move an assistant superintendent for business services beyond what assistant superintendents for educational services make.
Put differently, then, if you have to go to 150,000 to get an assistant superintendent for business, you're saying you would do that for the other assistant?
I think they're all worth that, yes.
Okay. Well, I think that's very important that you say that, and I appreciate that.
Well, and by the same token, nor would I move a principal of one school ahead of a principal of another school. If they're a junior high principal, then I think we should be paying them at the same rate. Now, we have big differences in our junior highs. Some are twice the size of the others. Some are, well, have different populations. The same thing happens at high school levels, same thing happens at elementary levels. I would be happy to bring back specific recommendations, and I would be interested in knowing more about this overscale flexibility. That's an intriguing concept, and that could even allow differences based on specific applicants, although I don't know how that helps us advertise and to make it more attractive in the advertisement, because one of the big things that happens in the advertisement is that people look at that range, and even though they won't be coming in at the top of the range, they know that at some point they will be at that level, and it may take 8 years in our system, and may already take 8 years. And well, some administrators have been administrators forever. No,
Let me just ask you some more questions. I find this intriguing. So, I mean, in one statement, you wouldn't want to have a differential between your two people in the same job category. But then you're interested in overscale. That's about
Well,
differentials.
I do know that. I'd like to know more about how that works.
Okay.
So,
But
for
if you had, all right, how far do we take the logic? Yeah, so if you bring in an assistant superintendent for business at 150,000, then basically you've said that you would want that to be the salary for all assistant superintendents. Does that then impact other administrative positions like directors, managers? I'm looking here, just directors, for example.
Actually, Dr. Null, that was why I asked the superintendent, I mean, obviously, he's gotten some board response, and he'll have a chance to reflect on some of those discrepancies in what he's thinking. But I think that it would really hone our discussion if we saw recommendations.
I agree, but
yeah.
I'm pressing Dr. Sarvis about about his thoughts, because I see this as having a ripple effect that hard to stop. As soon as you do one, the logic carries it through, and hard to stop.
Well, that-
which basically then reduces to an increase across the board.
Well, that's why I said that one way to go about it is simply mathematically to find those that are out of sync with the others. Another way is to go through and cherry pick positions to take specific, like a specific school principal or a specific assistant superintendent, and move them ahead. I would tend not to do. However, let me give you this example. If we need to go out for an assistant superintendent for business services, and we're currently doing that, and we've been advised to do that at $150,000 at the high range, and in fact, we're offering, where is it? $130,000. Comparable districts are offering $150,000. If we throw out the top, if we throw out the Tustin and we throw out the bottom Ventura, and now we're at 140,000. Well, what if we do have someone of, let's say we discover that Eric Smith is of such high caliber that, that he's the kind of person we want to attract to our district. I doubt that we'd get Eric for $150,000. He knows that he's a prime commodity. He knows what he's worth. Now, that creates another
I don't know
dilemma
that
for
this
us.
conversation makes Eric uncomfortable, but it makes me uncomfortable.
Well, that was a what if. Well, but I did want to put it in the context of a very,
The room was cold, he did you a favor.
yeah, now you're warmer.
Switch gears for a little bit. I think one of the things, you talked about market. In the CBO market, there's nobody out there. I'm just telling you that right now. There's nobody out there. This is a difficult, place to relocate to. All those things are going to be, they're going to be difficult things to overcome. I mean, I'm just telling you frankly. I mean,
So you're saying we would have to entice somebody away from a position they already have?
well, and the other issue is that if you're looking for somebody with, a significant amount of experience, you might get somebody that wants to cut their teeth here and might be an up and comer. I mean, that's how you guys got Mary Stark. But she was never a CBO. She was a first-time CBO. To move somebody that's highly qualified to relocate here in basically what's a buyer's market for CBOs, I'm just kind of echoing, and I have no designs on it. I've told Brian this several times. It's not my intent to apply for the position here. I am here on an interim basis, but it is a difficult market for employers with respect to CBOs.
Well, my intention was to put this in a very real context.
You just did.
We need,
Good job.
we need talent, and we need to be able to attract that talent in. And that first blush look at an advertisement, which is just a little couple of inches in a job listing that shows the salary amount makes a big difference.
Well, there's just a fundamental issue here, isn't there? I mean, in order to get a CBO, we may have to raise everybody.
Well, shall we hear from our public speaker? Well, we've sort of reached an impasse in terms of discussions. There's no point in beating a dead horse.
Mr. Wheeler?
I appreciate the need that you for addressing this issue, because I too think that we need quality in those positions. Feel like a little bit like a Dr. Seuss story. I speak for the trees. This is a slippery slope, and I know Dr. Sarvis is committed to hiring and retaining quality people at all levels. Educators are the wheels that really run this district in concert with the certificated or with the classified folks and the administrative team. Every time our teachers fight for a raise and receive it, administrators get that raise. So do the classified folks. I believe I would rather see a case-by-case statement made for why a position needs to have an increased level of funding or a higher salary rate, rather than say just across the board we need to increase these positions. You know, you can make a very credible argument for why CBOs are a commodity that needs a higher income level. But when you start talking about this, you're going to really disenfranchise the very people that you want to have most enfranchised, because it costs the same amount of money for them to live in Santa Barbara as it does someone who's making twice their salary. And I would encourage you to keep that at the forefront of any of these discussions. This is not a valuable discussion and an important one, especially in light of the fact that we have not been able to keep and retain quality people in those high-level positions. But I would really caution you to go about this in a very selective and careful way, because we don't want to alienate the very people that we need most on board to accomplish the educational goals that we have set forth.
Thanks, Mr. Wheeler. Okay, so we will look forward to seeing that item in the future. Look forward, I don't know. We will anticipate seeing it. How's that? We need to return to items D3 and D4 from the consent agenda.
Yeah, wait a minute. I gotta find them.
For Christ's sake. D3 was approval of staff travel, and D4 were the personnel items.
I want to ask this question. As I see categorical funds being spent like this, $1,630, I have no problem with it whatsoever, but it always enters my mind, how close to the limit of how much can be spent for non-instructional, non-direct classroom use are we? And am I saying that in an intelligible way? There's a limit. The 85, 15% direct classroom, I'm not remembering the exact word.
That-
Direct student benefit.
The classroom expense formula?
Yeah.
The classroom expense formula? Is that in aggregate? Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, and it's and I don't know whether the Title II may be one of the exceptions to the 15% rule.
Right, Title II doesn't come under that. Are you talking about the 85%, say,
Yeah.
of Title I that needs to go directly to schools?
Yeah, well, each of the
Right.
various funding sources has its own rule.
Title II does not
Title II
have
does not.
that. no.
Okay, thank you very much.
I move to
That
approve.
was my question.
I move to approve.
Second?
So Malakoff and Parker, all those in favor of approving D3 signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. Item D4?
There's a item, the very top line, a teacher, general fund at Monroe, not currently budgeted, $41,778. And I don't fully understand that. Is that because of some change there, or?
Yes,
Why are
we-
we adding a teacher at this point?
We opened up a new kindergarten classroom about October, mid-October. For some reason, we were over-enrolled in our kindergarten
Well, that-
classes,
that's
and we
my
got
question.
enough to get a class there.
Precise, I said to myself, that can't happen unless there's more students.
Student enrollment.
All right,
And
thank you.
in case it's
I'm-
covered. Yeah,
I
there you
move
go.
to adopt it.
Is
To
there a
approve it.
second? Thank you. So it's Noel and Malakoff. All those in favor of approving item D4 signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? None. So it passes 5-0. Coming events, I believe Dr. Sarvis announced at the start of the meeting. Board correspondence, board comments, future agenda items. Yes?
I had asked before, and I just wanted to repeat my request that we have a session, an item discussing planning for the use of lottery funds and planning for the use of developers' fees.
And those are on the list for
They are on the
future
list?
agenda
Okay.
items.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you very much.
May I give you a rundown of other board meetings to come?
Certainly.
Single plans from the junior highs will be presented this Friday at 1 o'clock. I believe the board's meeting in closed session at 12. The board meeting next Tuesday night on district properties and facilities master plan. Our organizational meeting will be December 11th, which is a regular meeting time. And that will include the study of the first interim budget report. We will follow that 2 days later by a special meeting on Thursday, December 13, and I believe 5 o'clock was the time that was selected for possible approval of the first interim budget report. That means that budget document will be out Friday. It will undergo board study on Tuesday and be subject to approval on Thursday. So that's,
Board
sounds
members
like
are
7
looking
days to me.
puzzled, but there was a number of emails circulated by Julie Medina to choose either Thursday or Friday, 5 PM or 6 PM. And I believe other people had obligations on Friday. Thursday was the day, 5 o'clock.
It's just the one that's just been going around was the one for Thursday, December 6th. So we're, I think, thinking about that.
Okay, well, both were circulating.
Would you,
Go through it again.
yeah, I would,
Or actually, better yet,
Let's
let's have
confirm
Julie
this with-
send an
summary.
email that summarizes all the meeting
Excellent.
dates and times.
excellent.
Okay.
okay, good.
I
So-
also, I'm sorry. I didn't want to cut you
Well,
off,
I
Dr.
just wanted
Sarver.
to make sure that you knew that we'd be back here together on Friday.
Yes.
Good.
Yeah, we jumped into that before I had a
Yeah,
chance to talk about future agenda items.
Oh,
I was just wondering, I had requested also previously that we get a report on, well, I'm going to add this part to it. The ethnic makeup of our faculty, our teaching faculty in the districts, both districts, and also the breakdown of the ethnicity of the teachers teaching AP and IB classes. I'm sorry, and GATE classes.
Well, that raises a question of if you're going to do that, will you include how many GATE teachers teach solely a GATE or AP or IB curriculum?
okay.
So I want to
Good.
include the academies in that as well, I guess is what I'm asking. Okay.
Do you mean, you mean solely? Because we've worked to spread those. I doubt that we'll have any that teach solely.
The perception is out there that there are teachers who teach only AP or GATE curriculum. And I don't know what happens in, for instance, the Mad Academy, since they all take GATE English. I'm not sure how it ends up sifting out.
Okay,
Okay.
good.
No, going once, going twice, adjourned.